Data Voyagers.
Hello, Data Voyagers. Welcome to another episode of the Data Voyagers podcast, navigating the stories behind numbers. This is our eighth episode, Statistical Thinking, the hidden clues behind numbers. So, we have a very cool episode prepared for you. But before, make sure you invite more people to listen to our podcast, invite them, and that includes yourself, to subscribe to the Data Voyagers podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Visit our blog, datavoyagers.com, follow our LinkedIn page, and also ask people to share it, spread the word. Once you listen to an episode, you can give us 5 stars in any podcast platform that help us to reach more people. And in our website, datavoice.net, we now have a store where you can buy super cool data related t-shirts, mouse pads, and stickers, and a lot of things. So we're about to start a new episode about statistical thinking with a lot of detective and Sherlock Holmes references. My name is Igor Alcantara, talking from the United States. Oi, pessoal. And with me, I have my friend, Angelika Klidas.
Hallo allemaal.
Okay, so statistical thinking is not just about numbers, it's about understanding variation, uncertainty, and how to reason from evidence. In this episode, we borrow the mindset of Sherlock Holmes to uncover how statistical thinking helps us finding hidden clues in data, make better decisions, and avoid being fooled by randomness. This is a very difficult word to say. You might have access to data, but can you really understand data? As Sherlock Holmes said, you see, but you do not observe. I love this quote. Imagine walking into a room where something has gone wrong. The furniture's been moved, a teacup shattered, and a window left open. Most people would notice the mess, but someone trained in statistical thinking would ask, is this a usual variation or a true anomaly? Is that evidence of a pattern? What's the probability of this scene happened just by chance? This mindset, this curiosity, blended with skepticism, is at the heart of what we call statistical thinking. In this episode, we explore what it means, why it matters, and how embrace it can change the way we see the world around us, not through the eyes of a mathematician, but through the lens of a detective. So that's the episode we have prepared for you. We're about to start, but before that, just a quick word from our sponsor. At IPC Global, we're different. Our mission goes beyond delivering data projects. We drive real business outcomes. We help our clients grow revenue, streamline operations, and reduce costs by meeting them where they are and empowering them to achieve their objectives. What sets IPC Global apart is our commitment to keeping customers for life. We earn that trust every day through humility, professionalism, integrity, loyalty, and a family first mindset. We're not just technical experts, we're business partners who listen deeply and are relentless about delivering value. When you work with IPC Global, you get a team fully invested in your long term success because you are part of their family. At IPC Global, we do business differently.
So thank you. Thank you, IPC Global, for being our sponsor, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Angelica, let's get started the episode. So let's talk about the invisible case of pattern.
Yeah, well, so as Sherlock Holmes once warned, he said it's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. So in data and analytics, statistical thinking begins actually with being uh, with having the humility in your core, right? It's the idea that we should observe first before we assume that patterns may exist. And because they are not always obvious. In our amazing data world, statistical thinking teaches us how to recognize that randomness that can mimic structure, or to avoid self deception and bias, um, measuring variation rather than react emotionally to fluctuations, um, seeking signal into the noise, and so on. But let me add one more, seeing the world as it is, to be honest. So, where others might see noise in a volatile stock pricing or fluctuating customer review, statistical thinking, or a person with a statistical mindset would ask, is this a real chance? Or is it just a normal variability? Very difficult word for me as a Dutchie. And like Sherlock Holmes once said, when he is examining a crime scene, we don't just look, we observe, we measure, we question. And I love that fact, because we should question more and more and more in this era with AI around us. So, and when we look at data and data analytics, humans are not good at predicting patterns or differentiate random to patterns. We cannot help it. It's just how our brain is evolved, right? And if we talk about an example, we could talk about sports. So if you are watching a basketball game and a player makes 3 shots in a row and the crowd starts screaming and buzzing, he's on fire, give him the ball, he can shoot, he can score, and it feels logical, right? Because he must before how do you say it? He's in the zone, so he could score most likely when makes the next shot. But here's the twist when we look at statistical analysis. So when you do an analysis about 1,000 basketball games that show the probability of making the next shot after a streak is often not higher than normal. The so-called hot hand is usually an illusion. And this is called the hot hand fallacy, a brain's tendency to see patterns or momentum in random sequences. So when we expect randomness to look random, so we see a streak of 3. He scored 3 times, so is he in the zone? He has a hot hand. And we assume it's a meaningless shift in the performance, but truly, the streaks are normal. And they do not necessarily mean that somebody has improved, or they just happen. It's random. And in business or data analytics, we fall for this too. So when we look at data, for example, in a sales application, when a sales rep closes 4 deals in a row, we say, he's on fire, he's on a streak, he will close more. Or in a marketing channel, there are 3 good weeks. And then suddenly we think we reached gold, we touched gold, we found the golden nugget, right? Or when the sales dropped for 2 constructive months, we should blame somebody for this, right? Because the sales has dropped. Or another one, and that's in real time, do TV ads really increase the sales? Or is it just a season? Or is it something else? Most of the time, TV ads create brand awareness, brand identification. Maybe they increase a little bit of sales, but not all, to be honest. But we need to evaluate those results in context of the expected variation. So we are just guessing, not observing. And statistical thinking helps us to pause, step a little bit back, look at the whole and ask, is this streak real, or is it just a hot hand illusion? And Igor, you are the data scientist amongst us, and I know you are very good in statistical thinking. What should be the common next step?
Well, the common next step in that case is try to identify if you, for example, you have a bias, and try to identify the actual statistical properties of an event. Like when you say the hot hand fallacy, um, well, we're talking about probability. What is the probability of shooting like 3 points in basketball, or let's say you're in a casino. What is the chance of throwing the dice and getting, I don't know, a 7 or an 11? And some people, they think, oh, I'm in a hot hand because I'm hitting the right number like 3 times in a row. But the individual probabilities are the same as you said. So identifying those is interesting. And our brain, it's very easily fall for these traps. And one of them is what we call the bias. And we have this all over the Bible. One of them is called the sampling bias. So using our detective analogy for this episode, imagine that you're Sherlock Holmes and you're solving a case based only on witnesses from one side of the street, and you think, well, that would be so naive, that would be absurd. But we do something like that all the time in analytics. So sampling bias is one of the most overlooked traps in everyday work for data analysts, everybody who works with data. So some examples: you survey only certain customers and assume the results represent the entire customer base, or you build modules on data collected from only one portion of the population, or I think that's the most important one: you ignore who wasn't observed. And I'll give you a few examples. So
Yeah. So can I ask you
yes.
something? I was talking, and maybe it's a true story because I'm helping students at the university here in Amsterdam, the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and one of the students is doing a survey about a certain type of bicycle brand. It's a special type of bike, so it's actually a rather expensive to buy such a bike. Um, and they have special groups, right? And he wants to do for his thesis. He wants to do a thesis um, around adding more community elements. So crafting a community so that people will get excited and look for each other in this community brand. And one thing that he did, he wanted to do a survey. So the first question that I asked him, please think about your sample. What's a good sample? What do you expect? How many people are in those groups? What do you expect as a response? And how much do you need to actually uh, write the new design based upon the wishes and demands they tell in your samples, in your survey? So sampling bias is very important, and students, when they want to finish their study with a thesis, with a survey, or conducting a survey and doing some kind of statistical research, sampling and being very accurate about it is very important, right?
Yes, in that case, in the survey, for example, it is very important not only the data you collected. Of course, you need to have a good sample. So if you doing a sample about a certain population, your sample needs to represent that population. But is also important, and this is very often ignored. It's very important how your data was collected. So let's say you're doing a survey, and you decide, oh, I'm doing this survey and I interview 100 people. I don't know, Tuesday morning at this mall or whatever. Well, who is in the mall at a Tuesday morning? So you're definitely not getting most of like a working class people because they are at work. So that's a valid, okay, you can do that, but also do some other locations, because then you're getting just people that go to the mall in the morning, in a during the week. So how the thing is collected, it's also important. So you need to like spread, or you just go to like the rich neighborhood. That's your sample. It's bias, so you need to get different neighborhoods, etc. Unless you having like studied, oh, I'm doing this study of the people in Jones Creek, Georgia, and then that's fine. But then you need to understand how it collected. What are the people who are interviewing? Um, a lot of like in the United States, a lot of election polls they do through the phone, and so you get the polls are usually very biased because you get like who answers the phone from like a number that you is not on your contact list. Usually it's a certain pattern of people, like usually older people. Like if I don't, if I recognize the number, I usually don't pick it up because I know it's like telemarketing or something. So that is very important. And talking about sampling bias. Oh,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so if I'm trying to understand, so I can help my student even better, so it's not only to look, I think, at the amount of people that you want to spread the survey around, but it's also about accepting what minimum of responses do you want to have,
Hmm.
right? But also, are they, how do you call it, volatile? So can we have different groups of people within this data set, right? Because it's not only
Yeah,
what I get back, but also what what classification in age, what classification in city or in country or whatever is necessary. So I think as a whole you have to think of that, right? That would be that was my advice to this
yeah.
student.
And also record the people who do not reply. There's some people you ask them and they will not reply.
Yeah.
Record that information because that's also data. Um, Now,
Hmm.
let me on that sampling bias. Let me give you one example about credit risk. So let's say we have like a mid-sized company, business to business service, and they want to optimize the credit policy for new clients. So the finance team reviews the payment behavior over the past 18 months, and they make a conclusion. Well, the late payments are very rare. Only 2% of invoices are more than 30 days overdue. So they think, well, yeah, they feel confident and they kind of loosen the credit terms for new clients. So they give higher credit limits, fewer upfront deposits. So they say, yeah, there's not such a big risk. But here's the catch: their data set only includes existing clients who passed the onboarding process. So clients who were screened, approved, and have built a payment history. So their data, it's only the good clients. When they loosen up the credit terms, then we get like a pretty bad scenario. We had an increase in delinquent accounts. We have more write-offs. We had a hit to cash flow that could be avoided. And what they're missing are basically clients who were rejected due to, for example, weak financials, accounts that were open but later written off or never did businesses, and high risk prospect who never completed the onboarding. So they were ignoring like the bad, let's say bad clients. They only focus on the clients they approved, and that's very common. What and someone with the statistical thinking mindset would ask is like, well, is this sample representative for all potential clients or just the ones who make through the gate? They'll also think, who collected the data for whom, under what conditions, does the sample reflect the population that I'm actually care about? So what is important is not only the data you have, but also what the data you failed to collect. And this actually it's one example of another bias or sampling bias problem that we call the survival bias paradox. So the survival bias paradox actually became very famous during World War II, and that's a very classic example. We teach this in
I
almost every
use it in my
statistical class.
visualization trainings always.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very popular because it's so powerful to show the message. So, but if people are new to this, I'll explain it. So, allied engineers, they were examining the planes that were returned from battles, and they want to reinforce areas in the plane to get more planes to return and not be destroyed. So they saw what the bullets were in their plane and they reinforced those areas. But then a great statistician, Abraham Ward, said, no, you're doing wrong. Reinforce the areas with no bullets. And they were like, what? Are you crazy? I said, no. And he was right because they were only observing the planes who survived. So those are the places where you can have holes and the plane will come back. The planes who had holes in the other areas, they did not have that symbol because they were destroyed. They didn't return. So by doing that, you actually get like pretty good results. More planes return. So what we learn from this is what is missing in your data is one of the most important clues at all. And also in a crime scene, like in my podcast in Portuguese, we did an episode about forensic science, and then we interviewed like this guy, like expert in forensics, and I said, well, sometimes the best clue is when we don't have something, like, well, where's the blood, like things like that. Um, and another one example of the survival bias is what we call the silent majority effect, um, which it's actually very common. We assume the loudest or most visible opinions will represent majority. And sometimes they are minority, but just because they're loud, we think, oh, everybody's talking about that, or this is the opinion of this or that group. Um, so, for example, you only reviewing online reviews. Sometimes they are overwhelmingly negative, because unhappy customers, they are way more likely to give reviews than happy customers. So if you're happy, usually, okay, I'm happy, and that's you keep it to yourself. It's very rare for you to make it publicly. And also, social media may amplify certain views that don't necessarily reflect the general population. So with the statistical thinking, you will not mistake volume by representativeness. So you act based on signal, and that may be distorted, exaggerated, or just completely misleading.
Yeah,
So that sampling bias is something real and very important that we need to
I
always
think so.
keep
Yeah.
an eye open.
Yeah, what I also talk about, maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's not biased, but maybe it is. I'm not sure, but I always tell people we always tend to look at the good things, right? We have the top five customers, we have the top five sales, we have the top 10 this, we have the top 10 that. But actually, to improve, you should look at the bottom section. Maybe we should say goodbye to those customers, or we have to improve in this process section. Um, so I always I call this the flipping technique, to turn things around and look at the things that need attention to actually improve. So maybe that's even a little bit survivor bias. I don't know, but that's also a bias element that I always find very intriguing. Why do we always look at the things that are good instead of also having that view on things that we have to improve?
They give comfort, and that's actually it's a bias. I mean, we have a lot of example of confirmation
Yeah,
bias.
yeah,
You
confirmation bias. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's very common. Now,
Yeah, and
another
then we have
thing. Go ahead.
that probability and reasoning under uncertainty, right? That we have to discuss. So
Absolutely. Let's talk about it.
yeah, let's grab back to Mr. Holmes. So he had never an absolute proof of making a move, right? What he actually had was likelihood. And this is the heart of probability. So, statistical thinking doesn't promise certainty, but it helps us to make better decisions under uncertainty. So, if you look at things or think of ideas, we could talk about understanding probability as a long run frequency or no gut feeling, right? Or not gut feeling. Recognizing how poor we are at intuitively judging risk or using expected value to guide decision making. Um, can you help me in explaining it? Because your English is, I think, a little bit better than mine. And statistical thinking in Dutch is completely different than statistical thinking in English. But can you help me with an example about probability and reasoning under uncertainty, Igor?
Uh, oh, absolutely. One example. This is actually very. It's not very intuitive to think about it, but mathematically it makes totally sense. And it's when we're talking about rare events. I think that's one. That's the. I mean, we have the hot hand fallacy that you explained. That's a good example. If you throw, let's say you have a coin and you throw three times and you have heads three times, it doesn't mean that the probability of having tails the next time it's higher because tails is due. No, each probability is independent.
Yeah.
But also there's another thing, and when we have rare events, they're very tricky to work with, and I think there was examples for disease, for like in healthcare. But let's say we are a supply chain manager. You work for a mid-sized company, and you want to justify cutting back on inventory for a key component, and then you say, well, it's only delayed 2% of the time, so it's very rare. So let's reduce the safety stock because it doesn't happen too often. So, but if you are if you have the statistical thinking mindset, you will think about it. Well, the 2%, it seems small, but isn't trivial because the component is essential. And if I delay that product, I will delay all my production. And over a year, with those enough shipments, the 2% is actually pretty big. Um, and the cost of disruption then is also will be problematically. So then the chance is small, but the consequence it's large. And then we have in healthcare another example. If I say, um, let's say you have a very rare disease that only happens in 2% of the people or 3% of the people. It's a rare disease. And then you do a test. This test has an accuracy or true positive rate, to be precise. You have a test that have a true positive rate of 95%. It means every 95% of the time it says someone has a disease, it is right. And that's a 2% case disease, a very rare disease. So I take the test and it's positive. What is the chance that I have the disease? Everybody will say 95% because that's a true positive rate. No. Uh, the true positive rate means what is the chance of the test saying they have a disease if I have the disease? But if I have the disease is the big if. That's a rare disease. So if you apply the math, then you find out that because it's a rare disease, if you take the test and the test says positive, the chance of you actually having the disease is like more likely 50%. So then that's why they repeat the test, or they do a different test to confirm and things like that. So because it's a rare, so and that's not intuitive to think about it, but it's basically the law of probabilities being applied. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does actually. Yeah, and then we have the coins, right? So the gambler's fallacy. The coin doesn't care about it what we do. So
Mm-hmm.
you spoke about it a little at the introduction. So let's say you are flipping that coin and you get tails 5 times in a row. Most people will start thinking, heads scissors do. So it will come. And that is what we call the gambler's fallacy. The belief that the past random outcomes affects future ones in independent events. That's what the chance of having tails versus heads. It's 50-50, right? So that's a kind of flawed thinking way that creeps into business decisions as well. And I know it's very, very hard to develop that statistical mindset for a lot of people, right? I know we have another one which is called the paradox, the Monty Hall problem. Can you help me with that as well?
Yes, yes. So the Monty Hall paradox, or the Monty Hall problem, it's another very common, famous one in statistics. And Monty Hall was like, it was a TV personality. He had this show. And you probably had some version of that in the Netherlands. We had in Brazil, actually different versions of that same. It was a game show, and basically they show like three doors to the guest, In one door, you have the prize. In two doors, you have something that is not the prize. Maybe a goat, maybe I don't know, a
Something.
pile of dirt, something that you don't want it. Um, and in that, I remember in Brazil there was like this show. One door there's a car, and the other door is like the goats or something else. And then, of course, the presenter and the TV folks, they know what's the right door, but the guest doesn't. And they say, pick a door, and you pick. Oh, I want to do door number. You pick door number one, and then you pick door number one, which at this point doesn't matter because you have 1/3 chance of getting the right door, right? And then the host picks one of the other two doors and he opens, let's say, opens door three and reveals a goat. And then he asks, do we want to switch door number two? And here's the catch. Most people think it doesn't matter because now I have two doors and it's 50-50%. But it's actually not true. You're ignoring the fact that the presenter of the show, in that case Monty Hall, he knows the right door. So he opened the door with previous knowledge. So statistics says that if you actually switch in the second chance, your winning chances goes from 1/3 originally to 2/3. Why? Because initially you have 1/3 of being right, but because the host knows the door, his action gives you an information. So the chances of the door he didn't open, let's say you pick door number one, he could open door number two or three. He opened three. Why he didn't open two? The chances of two being the right door, he would never open the right door because what's the fun? Because he knows what the right door and he didn't open a specific door, that door has a higher chance of being the door with the prize. So that that problem teach us that our intuition about probability most of the time fails. Everything, if you use your intuition, your gut feeling about the probability or statistics, you most likely will fail. Trust the method.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, then we have a last example, predictive analytics and the illusion of certainty. Um, so we have a beautiful example here, but maybe it's good to have an example from my practice. Actually, it's about 2016, 2017. I was working for a company and we needed to predict uh, some future like things like what is going to happen next year. And my customer said, if you could help me in predicting outcomes of the number of patients will be going or entering our first aid room, the ER room, but for GPs, right? Because we have the system here in Holland that you first go to the GP, the general practitioner, before you will be sent to a hospital. The first step is go to the doctors, the GP, and of course, if you have an accident and there is some trauma there, you will be brought immediately to the hospital. That's a different process. But the the GP post wanted to have predictions. And those predictions, they needed to be made based on, of course, on historical figures. That's how it works. But we added also some other elements like the weather tracking or the growth of the area here where we live in, how many elderlies would we have, the divided in age categories and everything. And from there we started thinking about about predicting the number of patients to the GP post. And as I always tell to my customers, Angelika or guys, it's nice that you want to know that, but please be aware that every prediction, per definition, is not true. It's not good. We have a probability chance of 85%, 95%, 90%, but it's per definition it's wrong. So we started building those dashboards, and actually, at the end, they called me after a year working with the predictions and how we work with it, and they say your 95% probability, it was rather good because you were spot on within the week. So we had a good model, first of all. But secondly, I helped them to understand that it could also be wrong. So the probability element needs to always be told to your customers that it's per definition is wrong, a prediction, right? Uh, so it reminds us in statistical thinking that probability is not the destiny that you are going to. And I know that when you refer it to a churn or to customers, some flagged customers will not stay, or some unflagged customers will stay at the end. So acting as though probability is certainty, it leads to wasted resources. That's actually the explanation of the story, and I hope it's clear, because statistics again in English and statistics in Dutch, it's something else. Uh, but I think the story is that predictions can be done, but per definitions they're wrong. Um, and it could move when you look at the GP post, that more people from a certain age group will be there, what you predicted, but it will move maybe to another group. That's the same way, right? So it can turn around. But per definition, it was rather good, the prediction. So that's cool. Do you have something to add to this story, or to the way or how predictions work,
Yeah, no, it's
Igor?
exactly what you said, that probability is not certainty. So when you say something has a 95% chance of happening, then it means that also have a 5% chance of not happening. And a lot of people think or get confused with rare events with impossibility. Rare events are rare, but they happened. And if you repeat something multiple times, those rare events may add up. So if I have 95% of something good happening and 5% of something bad happening, and I do them multiple times, those 5% of 10,000, it's a lot. 5% of even 1,000 is a
Mhm.
lot. Um, so you need to take that into consideration and understand how to work with probability. So let's say you're talking about customer churn, and you see that there's a high probability of certain customers to cancel their subscription or the contract, and there's a lower chance of other customers doing the same. And then you need to ask, um, is it worth the investment of keeping this customer, uh, or no, even with a higher probability? But at least you should invest, or you should not, because sometimes you just lose money there. So don't be overconfident in rare events. It's the other thing, and think about like, what are the bias that are affecting me here. Um, and that's another thing, because that also can influence the probability. Are we talking about a rare event?
Yeah, maybe a good question. So I think we are almost through some of the bias types of things that can occur. But what are the two most common bias mistakes that we do in our work in data and
Uh,
analytics? What
Well,
are
I
the two
think
most?
survival bias is very common, which is a type of sampling bias. So I think that is very, very common. And another, the gambler's fallacy, or the hot hand fallacy, is another one as well. So we see that a lot in sales. That we did two bad quarters, so we probably gonna have like a good quarter after this, because that's usually what happens, or this, or A, B, or C, which is not necessarily true, because one event not necessarily might influence the other event. And so those are some of the misconceptions. And always question where is this data coming from? And one exercise that I ask people, my students, when I teach this to ask themselves is, what data it's not here? What data am I missing? What data was not collected when you do an analysis? This is like very important, so you don't fall through like the survival bias, for example. Um, and always, there's always a bias. It's impossible to remove all the bias, but you need to be aware of them and measure against it, and try to reduce as much as possible. Not there. Yeah, go ahead.
How should people so like your customers, right? You have customers, I have customers. We do both the data literacy and AI literacy trainings for our customers. Um, what would be the first step for those customers to take on their journey in statistical thinking? What should they do first?
I think is be aware of these concepts, like the probability, and the biases, and also even some concepts around the descriptive statistics. But at the end of the day, what I tell people is understand the meaning behind what you're doing. Let me give you an example. Um,
Mm.
let's say someone wants to analyze the payment structure in the company, and so they're doing like an analysis based on average income or average salary of their employees. Ask yourself, why am I doing average? What does average mean? um, because a lot of times average is not the best option for you. Sometimes it is, but understand what it is. Like, let's say you're studying.
But then you have to, and that is where sampling bias comes in place, because you need to be sure what types of data do you have in your set. Are there extremes or are there no extremes? If the data set is flat,
Mhm.
right, you could use it. So you always have to look at it from different angles, from the mean angle to the average angle to the mode angle. That's always what I'm
Yeah,
trying to give back to my students. uh, you have to analyze your data set first in order to make a good decision. What kind of aggregation are you using to avoid
yeah. You want to
bias?
analyze total. You want to analyze central tendencies. Central tendency things will be things like mode,
Yeah.
median, average. You want to analyze outliers. You want to analyze most likely values. So depending on what you're trying to analyze, you have different measures. So be aware of those. Um, Now, in the
Yeah.
next and final topic of today's episode, um, an area inside statistical thinking is what we call the Bayesian thinking. Um, and the Bayesian thinking is about the Bayesian statistics. And it's a very, we use it a lot in science in general. It's a very beautiful way of thinking mathematically, statistically. Basically, you studying something, a probability of something happening, and you start with a prior belief based on experience, based on history, based on probability, based on previous data. You start with what we call a prior belief, and then you you do a calculations of probability and you observe new evidence. If the new evidence contradicts your prior belief, then you update your belief, and that will make your belief stronger um, or weaker, because then you say, "Oh, what I thought initially is not actually what is going on." And then you do that. So then you, at the end of the day, you get closer and closer to the truth cause of in a specific event. So let me give you an example about product return rates in customer segments. So again, we are a mid-market company. This time we are a mid-market retailer company that they know historically 10% of all online orders are returned. So there's a 10% return for online orders. Now their finance team is told that a customer just returned a product. Does this mean that the customer is likely to be a frequent returner? Well, that specific customer on its own, it doesn't. But what if you also learn that this customer has returned 4 of their last 5 orders? Then maybe it is. So your prior belief is that the customer return is 10%, they return 10% of the time. The new evidence is this particular customer returning behavior. And then the updated, or we call posterior belief, will now reflect a much higher chance for that customer to return most of the projects they purchase. And you can get this updated information and you can inform marketing, logistics, or even people responsible for fraud detection strategies. And that's what we call the Bayesian thinking. Another example is what we call the base rate fallacy. This is very popular, very common problem we have in statistics. And let's say, and actually, that is the example I explained before, but I'll explain in more details now. Let's say you have a rare disease that only 1% of the people have, and you have a test that identifies correctly 99% of the time. The true positive rate is 99% of the time. And then you have someone who tested positive for that disease. Most people will say the chance that the person having the disease is 99%, but it's actually 50%. So it's because, and the concept behind this is what we call the base rate fallacy. The base rate is not the entire population. The base rate is 1% of the population. So let's say you have 10,000 people in a population, only 100 would actually 100 will have a false positive test. So because this disease is rare, you need to consider, because the true positive rate in a model doesn't mean that chance you're getting right. Doesn't mean that it tends to getting right if the people is positive. But if the people is positive, it only happens in 1% of the time. So Bayesian reasoning then will teach us to balance the strength of the evidence, which is the test result, against the base probability, which is how common the disease is. And without that balance, we will overestimate the certainty. And this is very important. And that I show a healthcare example, but that applies to a lot of scenarios, especially for rare events. Now, another example, it's about HR and the process of hiring new people. Let's say an HR department uses a personality test to screen the applicants. And the test predicts a high performer, like really good professional, with 85% accuracy. Pretty good. So I can trust it. And so when someone gets flagged as a high performing, the managers assume they are almost certain to succeed. 85% is pretty good. But in reality, only 10% of the applicants turn out to be a top performer in real life. And why? It's the same idea. So if you're working through Bayesian thinking, you will start with a low prior, which let's say only 10% of the people are truly high performers. Then you update the belief based on the result. And it's the same of the rare disease. The result is the probability of people actually high performing may be closer to 50% than to 85%. So if you fail to recognize that, then you lead you to like overconfidence. Maybe you pay a higher salary for that new employee. Maybe you misplace expectation. Maybe the employee will be not high performing, but good, but you place so much high expectation that overall you will fail. So those are some of the things. Just to make sure, before we finish this episode, we just gave a brief overview of statistical thinking, and we plan to do episodes to specific topics like the correlation. It's not causation. I think there's the good one. episode for that, and some of the others we can do one episode to
And the outliers topic
outliers.
also we
Yeah,
will discuss, right?
and
Yeah.
so that's one thing. Another thing before we'll drive to conclusion is that statistical thinking, it's not only something used for work or only if you work with data. It makes you a better citizen. It helps you in your day-to-day challenges. If you're looking for a new house, a new car, or buy a new phone, or not only mention things about consumerism, or taking care of your health, or like anything, it applies to your daily life. Um, Anything to add, Angelika?
No, I don't think so. I'm agreeing with you. We need to be aware. So, I think it's good as a beginner, as a beginning data citizen, that you encourage yourself to go into the basics of statistical thinking, and from there go beyond and grow. It's the basic concepts that we need to think of, but also that we need to understand, because we are in this world surrounded by dashboards, reports, tables, KPIs, whatever. So we need statistical thinking. It's not
Yeah,
optional
we live
anymore.
in a world surrounded with data. So statistical thinking, as you
Yeah.
said, is not optional. So it's the difference between using data or being used by data, which is a kind of reality for a lot of people now. And develop
Yeah.
the discipline of reasoning. It's also important.
Yeah. Ask always the why questions. Why?
Exactly.
Right?
So, thank
Yeah.
you, Angelika, to being here with me, recording this episode. Thank everybody who's listening. Again, make sure to subscribe to the Data Voyages podcast, and share with more people. We want to increase our base number of listeners, our weekly base number of listeners. Thanks again for IPC Global, for our sponsor, for Click to all support they also give to us. And
Yeah. And the business data challengers, they also support us. They share. So yeah, great things are happening, and I'm looking forward to the coming episodes, where we not only discuss topics like statistical thinking or questioning or whatever, but also we have the ability to invite guests to join us in our conversation, in this era of data and
all
analytics,
right.
right?
So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
See you next time. Ciao, ciao, pessoal.
Tot ziens. Tot ziens. Or in my other native language, Stinyasu Tatapume in Greek.
Very good. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Data